It's really an honor to be part of this process. And I'm very aware, as I move through Iowa, I'm very aware in all of the early primary states, that you are very aware of the power that you hold. And it's very moving, actually. It really is a right of democracy. And in many, many ways, those rights of democracy are eroding. But this one remains. It's a really big deal. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know that as part of your doing your due diligence, you're listening to a lot of people. And you should listen to a lot of people. That's your due diligence. There are a lot of people running this year. And I don't feel I'm running against anyone. I feel I'm running with a lot of very good, very smart people. So you have a while before you're going to caucus for anybody, but thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell you how I see America and what I will do with the power vested in me if you, in fact, choose, and it is your choice, to make me the nominee and then the President of the United States. I see all this within a historical context. You know, many people have gone to therapy, studied what happened with their families, etc. And you learn about your parents, and you learn about your grandparents and your history, the history of your people, history of that which went before you. Because when you do that, you have a deeper sense of where you are now. And you learn what you owe your ancestors, and you have a deeper sense of what you owe your descendants. That's a large part of knowing who you are, knowing where you fit into things. But we have an odd way in which we really get that about our families. A lot of times we get that about our religions or our ethnicities. But we don't do that enough right now, who we are as Americans. We've been separated, among other things, by identity. My color, my religion, my sex, my sexuality, all of which is meaningful and legitimate in certain situations. But we should never forget that there's another identity that we all share. You're Jewish and you're American. You're black and you're American. You're gay and you're American, and so forth. And that is where we are very off today. And America, in a way, is having an identity crisis. And it's for all of us, I think, to decide what it means to be an American, given where we have been and given that it is ours to choose where to go. In 1776, some young men risked their lives to sign the Declaration of Independence. We all learned about that in school. But like so many things, you look back from the perspective of an adult and you see things with a lot of layers that you didn't at the time. 1776, some very brave young men signed that Declaration of Independence, establishing in this country something that had never been established before. And we should all keep our eyes all the time on what this is. It is a possibility, and that's all it is. But it is a possibility that there would be a place on this earth where anyone can soar, where anyone should be able to spread their wings, where anyone should be able to self-actualize, that it shouldn't matter who their parents were, that it shouldn't matter how much money they have, that it shouldn't matter what their religion is, whether they have a religion, it shouldn't matter anything. All are created equal, and God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence says those two things. It also says that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And it says that the people have the right to alter the government or even abolish it if the government's not doing its job. Now, on one hand, that's really extraordinary. On one hand, that repudiated centuries of aristocratic control where only a few people in England and so forth were deemed entitled to the opportunities to manifest their dreams. A few people could own land, a few people could have wealth, a few people could get educated, etc. With the founding of this country, that was thrown on its ear, and all people should have the chance. That's where it started. But that's also where it got very gnarly. Because out of the 56 men who signed that, 41 of them were slave owners. So the truth is, we have always been both. That's the American DNA. That's the characterological bipolarity, that on one hand, we are founded on these extraordinary possibilities. That's what it is. That's what America is. It is a vision of possibility. It is a commitment And that is what every generation should feel. And part of our problem is that in our time, we have lost our psychological and emotional bonding with those principles. I mean, they're written on marble walls and they're written on parchment behind glass, but if they're not alive in our hearts, principles are dead if they're not alive in your hearts, because generations are called upon, and every generation in its way is called upon. And this includes ours as much as any other before us. How much do you mean that? Because every generation writes its own chapter in an ongoing story. So we have been slave owners. We've had 250 years of slavery in this country. We also answered that with abolition. We had the institutionalized suppression and denial of rights to women. We answered that with the women's suffragette movement. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South. And then we answered that with the civil rights movement. That's our story. America's the greatest in terms of possibility, and in every generation there are those whose hearts are ablaze with that possibility and stand on that possibility and know that it's our job as citizens in any generation to protect that possibility and to make sure it's even better so that we can give it to the young ones who are in this room. That's what's going on. We're living at a time, ladies and gentlemen, where that possibility is as under assault as has ever been true in our history. Today, it's not an institution. It's not an evil institution. You know, if it's an evil institution, you could liken it to an operable tumor. Like an operable tumor, you cut it out. Slavery, abolish it. Denial of rights to women, give women the right to vote. Segregation, in segregation. This is more an economic mindset. It is an economic filter that started in the 1980s, and it is the idea that all that corporations should have to do is serve the financial bottom line of its stockholders, even if that's at the expense of the worker, even if that's at the expense of the community, even if that's at the expense of the environment and the planet on which we live, even if it's at the expense of people in other parts of the world. Now that of itself, you know, many of us are old enough that we remember pre-1980s. I'm not saying that before 1980 everything was perfect, but there was a consensus before the 1980s that at least we were supposed to try. We were supposed to try to treat people right. What happened in the 1980s was not only did that economic theory, backed by huge amounts of money, get offered as what should be what the people who were promoting that said, is that that economic theory, the idea of short-term profits for stockholders of huge corporations, the idea was that that should be the bottom line for how our society operated, that that should be the main organizing principle for our country. And that's very different than to say democracy should be our main organizing principle. That's very different than saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should be the organizing principle. That's very different than a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That changes everything to a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, and for a few of the people. Because it changes everything to a government of huge multinational corporations, by huge multinational corporations, and for huge multinational corporations. Now, we're a capitalist society. This is not an anti-corporation message. But in our history, we have always pushed back against overreach. That's why we have child labor laws. That's why we have unions. That's why we have antitrust laws, that no, big business forces don't get to just run roughshod over people and planet. But starting pretty much in the 90s and then by the 2000s had just blown up in our face, was not only did that economic theory become so powerful, but its capacity of those entities to dominate Washington, D.C. with their money became entrenched and institutionalized. So not only do you have these corporate forces who are now run on the idea that all they should have to be responsible for is their own profits. You have now a government which, because of the donations, the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions that those corporations can pay in Washington, government is basically its handmaiden. And that's where we are. We don't have universal health care because the health insurance companies and big pharmaceuticals don't want it. We don't have reasonable gun safety laws because gun manufacturers don't want it. We have contaminants in our food. We have pesticides for sale that we know harm a child's brain. We have the gutting of the Clean Water Act. We have the gutting of the Clean Air Act. Why? Because it makes more money for chemical companies. You have issues here in Iowa, farmers, agribusiness. You know very well what I'm talking about. When huge multinational corporate forces just run roughshod over the ability of just people. We don't deal with climate change the way we should. Many of us remember I always say in 1776, it was in 1976, that Jimmy Carter first put solar panels on top of the White House roof. And he said, we need to go green, basically, in 1976. If we had done what Jimmy Carter said in 1976 about starting to be more environmentally conscious, we wouldn't have all this craziness going on with climate change today. But the first thing that Ronald Reagan did, who was the ultimate corporatist president, is to remove those solar panels. Why? Because fossil fuel companies didn't want it. They didn't want the development of clean energy because that competed with them in the marketplace with the old fossil fuel-based energy. So our environmental policies, which were established, remember it was Republican President Richard Nixon who established the Environmental Protection Agency. Its purpose is to protect the environment. But the EPA, instead of being the protector of the environment, has become what it is today, which is run by an chemical company executive. Before that, it was run by an ex-oil company executive. So it does more to protect oil and gas than it does to protect us against oil and gas overreach. Same with the Food and Drug Administration. We have, we have thousands of contaminants in all of the drinking water all over the United States. There are 70,000 of them are regulated, but 130,000 of them are used in chemicals. Why do this Boeing disaster? All the talk in the paper today about and the last few weeks about these Boeing MAX disasters. The stuff I was reading in the last few days is the pilots who had warned. Well, why is that all that got through? Because the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, was too cozy with Boeing. Its job is to protect against something like a Boeing. Instead, it was cozy with them. I think some of that might change now, because they're certainly busted now in the most tragic way. Same with the opioid crisis. Where was the FDA when the Sackler family and predatory big pharmaceutical companies were selling, over-prescribing, over-manufacturing all these opioids? The OxyContin. Where was the FDA? Aren't they supposed to be protecting us? We were brought up to believe, well, we have these government agencies and they protect us. Really? Really? I don't know. We might really want to think about that, ladies and gentlemen. And so what's happening today is that we're, like I said, we're not really a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Donald Trump did not create everything that I just said. Everything that I just said created Donald Trump. And I think of him as a kind of opportunistic infection. None of this could have gotten hold the way it did had there not been a compromised immune system. You know what the immune cells are? You and me. In a country set up as ours was, where the power is supposed to be in the hands of the people, the founders said the only protection against tyranny is the people, which the more time goes by, the more and more profound we see that is. But if the power is not in your head and not in your heart, it's not in your hands. So we, the people, have been not only our rights shoved aside. It's not just that our rights are being roughshod over. I think there's a way in which we have to face that we have not been really living our responsibilities. Because to be honest with you, I don't think I have said anything tonight that we don't, on some level, all already know. I mean, maybe some of those details, but is there anybody in this room who can really say, oh, that's shocking. We know this. We've known this. The problem is we've gotten just trained to expect so little. And we have young people who don't even remember a time when Americans would have been more rambunctious about all this. We were born of a revolution. We were born of people saying, hell no to George III. Why are we accepting this like this? The real issue of our time is the psychological and emotional issues about us. You know, in life, at a certain point, it's not just about what happened to you. It's about who you choose to be in the space of what happened to you. And we've gotten trained to just say, pretty please. And politicians come through, and it's a politics of people pleasing. Ooh, she's a woman, maybe she wants to hear this. I'll say this to you. Ooh, you're black, maybe this is what you want, I'll say this to you. Somebody else might be gay. Somebody else might be Jewish. Somebody else might be Muslim. What do you want me to say? I'm not doing that with you. I'm talking to you as Americans. I'm saying the same thing whether people are rich or poor. I'm saying the same thing whether people are black or white. I'm saying the same things whether people are Jewish or Muslim or Christian. We as Americans must think really deeply now, because when Abraham Lincoln said that those men at Gettysburg died so that government of the people and by the people and for the people, they died, ladies and gentlemen. They died on that battlefield. And Abraham Lincoln said that they had died so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. It's perishing. It's perishing. It's like when a person regresses, because for all intents and purposes, we've regressed. We've gone back to an aristocratic situation. It's only a few people have really easy access to health care. Only a few people have really easy access to higher education. Only a few people can deal with all these college loans. Only a few people. It's the problem in America is that not some people can get rich. That's a good thing. We celebrate that people can make money in America. The problem in America today is not enough people can. That's the problem in America today. We have had, over the last 40 years, a massive transfer of wealth. Where I come from, that's called theft. And it's all been because we were told, oh, this is good, see, just lower the taxes and give corporate subsidies and stuff to this small group of people, this stockholder class, just take away all the regulations and let them do whatever they want, and they're the job creators. They're the ones who invest. They're the job creators. And the whole idea of trickle-down economics was they'll make a lot of money, but that'll be good, see, because they'll create all these jobs and all that money will trickle down and lift all boats. Well, first of all, I want to point out that the main articulator of that theory, he himself, his name was Milton Friedman, and he himself said that this will only be safe if we have a universal basic income. They left out that part. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been 40 years. And I think after 40 years, you kind of look at the results of something and decide, was this a success or was this a failure? It has not lifted all boats. It has left millions of people without a life vest. It has destroyed America's middle class. It has given us a situation where 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. And we have millions and millions of Americans living in chronic economic anxiety in the richest country in the world. It's one thing, you know, I've been in a career for 35 years where my job is to help people who are in trouble. It might be that the test results came back and it's cancer. It might be that their spouse is leaving. It might be their child is addicted to heroin. It might be that their business is going under. I understand. And for those of us in certain professions, that's what we do. But what I've seen in the last 15 to 20 years, too many people are in trouble in America. Too many people are in trouble in ways that they shouldn't have to be. They work hard. They're doing everything right, and yet are so economically burdened. And when people are economically burdened day in and day out, this is where all your social pathology comes from. This is where all the stuff comes from. People just can't live like this day in and day out. What am I going to do? What will happen if I get sick? What will happen if one of my kids gets sick? I have to be in this job even though I hate it, but I need it for their health insurance. how am I ever going to get out from under these college loans? You can't do this to people and not expect stuff to start happening. We keep talking about how we're going to pay for mental health. Why don't we ask ourselves, why are you making so many people crazy to begin with? What have we done to create a society where so many people have such anxiety all the time? And that's what our political establishment does. It addresses symptoms. It talks about how we're going to pay for health care, but what we need to be talking about also, how come so many of us are sick? Why is it, compared to other countries as powerful and rich as ours, that the chronic disease level is so high? Well, you're going to do that. Oh, you're going to have to look at your food policies. Going to have to look at your chemical policies. Going to have to look at your environmental policies. Have to look at some of your agribusiness policies. And so our political establishment will only talk to us about symptoms, because if you start talking about cause, then you're going to have to look at the dirty underbelly of America, which is how corrupt the entire situation has become. Now, I'm deemed an outsider. Interesting concept. Outside what? Outside what? This is America. So our Constitution says that you have to have been born here, which I was. You have to be 14 years have lived here. I have. You have to be 35 or older, which I am. Those are the qualifications to run for president. It doesn't say in the Constitution you have to be a congressman or a senator or a governor. Isn't that interesting? And they didn't for a reason. There are a lot of places in the Constitution where it's as important what they didn't say as what they did say. And the founders did not say that because they were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself the skill set they feel is necessary. Franklin Roosevelt said that the primary responsibility of the presidency is moral leadership. He said the administrative aspect is secondary. We have a lot of good political experts in this country, but we don't need a political mechanic so much as we need a political visionary. The issue is not just the best car mechanic. The issue is we're on the wrong road. Now, I have a lot of respect for political experience, but let's be really clear here, ladies and gentlemen. Very experienced politicians took us into Iraq. Very experienced politicians took us into Vietnam. That's not the level of political expertise. We have a lot of them. We have a lot of them. The problem with this president is not that he lacked experience, it's that he lacks ethics. He lacks a visceral taste for democracy. So I believe we need a season of repair. We need a season of moral repair. And I want to tell you the pillars of the moral politics that I propose. Number one, we need a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American. We need to repeal the 2017 tax cut that was $2 trillion tax cut. It gave 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest corporations and individuals. Put back in the middle class tax cuts. Stop the corporate subsidies. $26 billion alone last year for oil and gas. Martin Luther King said if they give it to poor people, they call it a handout, but if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. We need to say to our military how much you need, and every dollar they say they need, I believe they should get. But hundreds of billions of dollars above that, which has nothing to do with what the military said they needed, but only what defense contractors want in order to increase their profit line, they don't get. I agree with Elizabeth Warren that people who have made $1 billion in this country, if they made it righteously, God bless you, I'm happy for you, but we'd like 3% on those assets, please. You'll never feel it, because they won't. You say to people with more than 500 million, same thing, I'm really happy for you. It must be nice if you made it honestly. I'd like 2%, please. And I think we should realize how many billionaires and people with 500 million and above would say, you're right. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. No socioeconomic group has a monopoly on values. This is an American thing. We have to turn a very big ship. It is unsustainable what's happening. The economic mindset that I have described to you tonight, given support by our new way of aristocratic, oligarchic, corporatist political establishment, has created a situation which is diametrically opposed to your well-being, the well-being of the planet, and can we talk about what's most important? Her. That's what we should be thinking about. No person should live only for themselves, and no generation should live only for itself. And we have a politics which doesn't think you care. We have a politics which only thinks you care about yourself. I'm not interested in that. I'm not just talking to you about you. It's really not all just about you. It's about our country. And that is what we need. And I believe that the Americans are good people. We're decent people. We're dignified people. We need a politics that is worthy of who we are. And the politics today is too narrow a container for the level of conversation we should be having. You do the things I just mentioned, and let me tell you what we're going to do if I'm president. We're going to have some cash on hand. And the first thing we're going to do is to address what's happening with America's children. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 13 million hungry children in the United States. You and I need to really sit with that. This is the richest country in the world. There's none of this, how are you going to pay for all that? I don't know, stop giving it away to a very few people who don't need any more. Government should not function just to advocate for the ability of those with a lot of money to get more, making it harder and harder for people who don't have any to even make it at all. I don't think the average person who's created wealth in America wants to feel that their doing so is at the expense of other people having a chance. That's not America. We have 13 million millions of traumatized children in America. 13 million of them are hungry. We have elementary school kids in America who go to school and ask the teachers if they have food for them. And it is totally immoral the way we base our educational funding on property taxes. Because what that means is that if you live in a well-to-do neighborhood or, you know, a prospering neighborhood, the chances of a child having a very high-quality public school education is very good. Do you like your school? Yeah. But if a child is in some neighborhoods in this country, that's not the case. There might be in a classroom where they don't have glue sticks and paper. This is millions of children. We have millions of children who go to school in classrooms where they don't even have enough school supplies to teach a child to read, and by the age of 8, if you can't read, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. How old are you? 9. 9? Do you read? Can you read? How old are you?
9.
Can you read?
Yeah.
How old are you?
13.
Can you, well, obviously you can read, right? How old are you?
8.
8. And can you read? Okay. They're set up to win. They're set up to win. That age and they can't read. This is what conscience, we need a politics of conscience. I'm asking you, let us not look away from this. Where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years? Not only that, because these kids are loved, taken care of, educated, America's going to be better, America's going to be more prosperous 20 years from now because they're getting the education and the love they need. You want to take care of your economy 10 years from now, what do? You take better care of your 10-year-olds today. If you have children, you know, there is no power in the sun, and there's no power in the wind, and there's no power in the earth that can compete with the power in the human brain to fuel the 21st century that we need. That should be our national goal, and it will be if I'm president, that every school in the United States is a palace of learning, culture, and the arts. It's not just that no one should even have to worry about health care, which we're going to have money for because of what I just said to you. Not just that every parent should know you don't have to worry about sending them to college. There'll be free tuition at colleges and universities. You shouldn't even have to think about it. And nobody should have to think about their college loans. Why? So that you can be the person that you can be, because that is where money should come from, the creativity and the productivity of the American people. If you really want amazing things, if we do not educate every American child, we are failing to manifest millions, billions, and even trillions of dollars from the future. So you take every child who we're not going to give an education, just think about the money that would be manifest in the future if that child had money. And we're all just going around saying, oh, well, the money comes from a bunch of rich aristocrats who are dropping crumbs in the form of job creation. You have one major political party that's just dropping the crumbs, and then you have another major political party that's basically saying, you don't have to take crumbs, I'll give you a cookie. I'm saying to you, this is America. Everybody should sit at that table. That is the ideal. And we've forgotten the radicalism of America. We've forgotten that this is what it's supposed to be. Everybody should have a chance. So that's the first thing we need. That's why I want a Department of Children and Youth. This is more than about educational funding. We need all that. We need more funding for teachers. We need a smaller classroom size. We need to get rid of the high-stakes testing. But ladies and gentlemen, it's bigger than that. We need trauma-informed education. We need violence prevention. I don't think the average American has walked through some of America's schools and seen the trauma of teachers and students today, some of which I don't want to talk about because of some of the people who are in the room. But we know. We've got to stop pretending like we don't know. We've got to stop looking away. What I have learned in my career of working with people whose lives are in trouble is that sometimes it's when you have real problems that you become your most intelligent. We are Americans. We can handle these things, but not if we don't look at them. And we have a political system that would rather we not. Would rather we not, because they're told, well, if I'm negative, I'll tell you the truth. If you go to the doctor, don't you expect the doctor to be honest with you? Don't you want the doctor's going to have to tell you if the test results are bad so that we can have an intelligent conversation, talk about what we're going to do now. If I'm your president, I'm being honest, we got to talk about this. And talking about this, there's everything we need, we can do. Here in Iowa, I've seen it all over this country. Take the issue of the children alone. We have the experts who know what to do. We have the social workers. We have the teachers. We have the experts in childhood and childhood education. We have the neuropsychologists, early childhood, what's happening in the brains of an 8-year-old. We have all that. It's the same thing as in environmental issues. It's the same thing in peace building. But that's not who's given money. That's not who's given support, because that's not where the corporate profits come from. I want a Department of Children and Youth. The next thing I want is to apply that same principle to our national security agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, our national security, this is, what are we doing not talking about this? Don't you find it odd that we're not even talking about this as part of this campaign? Do you realize what's going on? Do you realize that for the sake of a $360 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia, and we know what that prince in Saudi Arabia did, something else we're not going to discuss, for obvious reasons, but CIA is now established. We know he did that. And he's now waging a genocidal war in Yemen. And tens of thousands of people are starving, including children. Our grandparents would roll over in their graves. It's not like America's ever been perfect, but there used to be a time when at least there was a social consensus we were supposed to try to be the good guys. Now we're not even talking about it. And when our Secretary of State was asked, how could America participate in a genocidal war, you know what his response was? His response was, well, sometimes you have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. No, you can't. That means you have no values. I met the Dalai Lama once. He told me that the people of the world no longer see the United States as a champion of democracy. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. We got to think about this. He said that the people of the world no longer see America as a champion of humanitarian values. What has happened to us? And if you think the political system is going to fix that, they are thriving on the fact that we are distracted. And, the way I look at the other opponent, my opponents in this, they're very good people. And they're telling you the truth. I'm not saying they're lying to you. But I will tell you this. When you go into a court of law and you raise your hand, you don't just swear to tell the truth. You swear to tell the whole truth. And you swear to tell nothing but the truth. I'm the one who's... No, I'm telling the truth. They're telling the truth. But I'm telling the whole truth. And I'm telling nothing but the truth. And we need to be real adults at this moment. We need to turn a very big ship around. In addition to that, it's the truth. If we don't take radical action to shift from a dirty economy to a clean economy, in the next 12 years, we could have in the next 15 or 20 years a level of social collapse like nothing seen in the modern era. The direction we're going. I was reading an article the other day about Las Vegas, Nevada. The rate things are going, Las Vegas, Nevada might become too hot to be habitable. If we do not deal with what's going on and shift from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we could find whole swaths of countries and continents uninhabitable because of the heat. They can't grow any food. People will be refugees, environmental refugees, because they can't live there. You think we have refugee crises now? That could be hundreds of millions of people. That would lead to massive food shortages. It would lead to massive economic collapse. We have to have a World War II level mass mobilization to shift from a dirty economy to a clean economy. In terms of the national security agenda, we can switch from a war economy to a peace economy. Right now, 53 cents of every dollar is invested in defense-related activities, even though financially there's more money from an investment in education and infrastructure. We spend $760 billion on our military, but only $40 billion on State Department, which is mediation and diplomacy and development, and the peace-building agencies, which have to do with expanding education for children, economic opportunities for women, reducing violence against women, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering, are given less and less. Less than $1 billion, actually. I believe that we should see all groups, large groups of desperate people, as a national security risk, because that's where desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to capture by genuinely psychotic forces. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that all public policy should be based on one core principle. What would help people thrive? What would help people thrive? What would help these little ones become everything they could possibly be? What could help you so that with your husbands, with your wives, with your lovers, with your friends, you have time, you have the ability to breathe, you have the ability to have hope, have the ability you can work in a job that you like, not just because you need to for the benefits, so that you would have the capital if you want to start your own business, do what you want. You want to start a yoga studio? It's not that hard. You can do it. Want to start a project? Not that hard. You can do it. So that people can spread their wings. That is what this country is supposed to be about. That is where money comes from. And that is where peace comes from. And right now, that's not our bottom line. Our bottom line is functioning in a very different way in all the things that I said to you. I want a Department of Peace because I want the peace builders to have as much power at the seat of at the table of power as do the military. I see the military like a surgeon. You gotta have surgery. We gotta have the best surgeon. Nobody's denying that. But you avoid surgery if you can by cultivating health. And we should cultivate peace. The United States should not be just known around the world for all the wars we get into. We should be known as peace builders. And I also feel that whether you're a country or an individual, you can't have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. And we have a next step to take in terms of racial reconciliation in this country. Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. Doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, which gave to all the surviving prisoners from the Japanese internment camps during World War II between $20,000 and $22,000. I feel it's time to pay reparations for slavery. In addition to that, I want to point out that it would only be an economic stimulus. You know, if we give money that's dispersed for projects of economic and educational renewal in the black community, there was a study recently, if black families manifest as much money as white families, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. What's not an economic stimulus is to just give your money to a tiny group of people. What is an economic stimulus is to allow it to be in the hands of the people. That's what our money should be spent on, doing the right thing. And that's why I feel the whole reparations conversation is not a black agenda to me, it's an American agenda. I want to end one aberrational chapter of American history. I want to begin a new one. Now, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, I believe everything I said to you tonight is common sense. The fact that common sense is considered too out there should tell you everything you need to know. So no, I'm not a weirdo, New Age crystal lady, anti-science or anti-medicine. I'm not a crazy woman. I'm a decent, and I believe, a woman of decent intelligence. should tell you how hardball the system plays, that they will character assassinate anybody who goes outside the lines. But you're Iowans. That's the thing about Iowa. They don't have the power you do. The people in Iowa, the people in New Hampshire, people in South Carolina, people in Nevada, you're the deciders. So I appreciate the fact that you have given me this opportunity to tell you how I feel. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. Basically, we need a politics of conscience. We need a season of moral repair. We need to make doing the right thing as important in our public policy as in our individual behavior. We need to do right by our children. We need to do right by our earth. We need to do right by other countries. We need to do right by peoples such as black people in America, descendants of slaves, and Native Americans as well. We need to do right by people. You do that, life's going to repair itself. We need a season of repair. It's got to be more than just on the level of policy. It's got to be on the level of our own moral vision. And if you elect me president, that's what we'll do. Thank you very much.